And welcome. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to factor two-term expressions. So before we actually begin this process in this particular problem, let's actually just take a look at our general factoring steps. So when we look at our steps, our first step is to count our terms. So if we go back to the original, we've got two terms in this case. Our second step then is to factor out the GCF if it's not 1. So if we look at our two terms, well, the largest number that goes into both 125, and you can think of there being like a 1 in front of that x to the third, the largest number that goes into both of those, or the largest factor they have in common, is 1. And then they don't share any variable factors. This guy has x's in them, but this guy doesn't. So that means their GCF would just be 1. So if we look back at our factoring steps, we would just skip this step 2. So step 3, we want to choose our factoring strategy based on the number of terms that we have. So in this case, we've got 2 terms. So we're going to be using a factoring strategy that goes along with two-term expressions. So the first step in that strategy is we need to choose an appropriate form for what we have. So when I'm factoring something of 2 terms, it's going to fall into one of 3 forms. So it's going to fall into a squared minus b squared, a cubed minus b cubed, or a cubed plus b cubed. So when I look at our guy, we've got 125 minus x to the third. So right away, I know that number 3 is out. Because number 3, we've got addition between our 2 terms. So I can cross that one out right away. When I look at numbers 1 and 2, the difference there is number 1, I would choose if my 2 terms were squares of something. Number 2, I'm going to choose if my 2 terms are cubes of something. So when I look at the exponent on the variable, it's kind of a giveaway. It's a cube. So that's making me think number 2 is probably going to be our best bet there. So we're going to go ahead and choose number 2. So once I've chosen my form, the second step then is to rewrite each term using that selected form. So I'm just going to rewrite the form that we selected. So it's a cubed minus b cubed. And then our original expression was 125 minus x cubed. So what I want to try to do is I want to try to rewrite 125 as something cubed minus, and then I want to write the second term as something cubed. So here's where I have to do a little thinking. What number cubed is 125? Well, that's just 5. And then in terms of the second one, what cubed is x cubed? Well, that's just x. So now, if I look at the original, I need to determine, okay, what's acting like big A for me? In other words, what's being cubed in my expression? Well, for me, the first guy that's being cubed is 5. So 5 is acting like big A in this particular example. What's acting like big B? In other words, what's the second thing that's being cubed? Well, for me, that's x. So big B for me is just x. Okay, once I've identified what big A and what big B are, the last step then is to substitute into my formula. So here's what I know. I know that every time I have a cubed minus b cubed, it's going to factor the same way. And the way that it factors is I'm going to have a minus b. That'll be my first factor. And then the second factor is going to consist of a squared plus a times b plus b squared. So now what I'm going to do is just replace my terms with, I should say I'm going to replace a and b with my terms. So every time that I see an a in the formula, I'm going to replace it with my a, which is 5. Every time I see a b in the formula, I'm going to replace it with my b, which is x. So here we go. In the first group, it's big A minus big B, so for me that's going to be 5 minus x. And then in the second group, it's A squared, so for me that's going to be 5 squared plus big A times big B is going to be 5 times x, or I could write that as 5x. And then at the end, I've got big B squared, so for me that's going to be x squared. And now the very last step is just to clean up that second factor a little bit. So the first factor I'm going to leave is 5 minus x. The second guy is going to end up being 5 squared is 25 plus 5x plus x squared. And that's it.